In today's video, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the upcoming pattern, talking about a few impactful cold fronts around the nation, bringing very cold air to the eastern half of the nation on multiple occasions. But not only that, pretty strong showers and potentially thunderstorms along those lines of boundary. So we're going to be talking about that today, as well as a very new threat in the Gulf of Mexico. Yes, believe it or not, we've kind of gone away with our original threat in the Gulf of Mexico. Now we have another one. Interestingly enough, this one is in the Pacific right now. Could cross over Mexico, become an Atlantic tropical system, and eventually impact the Gulf Coast. So we're going to be talking about that all today. Now, with all that being said, let's dive into things. And this is an example of how the models can just throw a wrench in the forecast in the short to medium range. We did not see this threat really in the long range whatsoever. And now all of a sudden they're popping up with it suddenly. And it's not at the end of the model run, it's actually midway through. So they really just missed it for a few days and then finally put it together. Both our European model and GFS model will be showing it today, and we have some spaghetti model plots and intensity plots to show you. Unfortunately, this one has a chance to become at least a hurricane, which honestly is a very frightening thought. So we're going to be talking about all of that today. The National Hurricane Center is kind of indicating that threat as well, so we're going to talk about all of this. Let's move through today. It's a little bit of a late night special today. We're going to move straight to Friday tomorrow from the time I'm making this video on October 4th. And what you see is that we do have some rainfall and snowfall collectively for the Pacific Northwest and also the Pacific Southwest of Canada. Mostly that snowfall happening on the Canadian side of things, but we do see some of the Cascades there in Washington seeing some snowfall. Heavier rainfall near the coast is common here this time of year, and we are seeing that occur here as we've had very frequent storms moving through, actually. We do see that although we don't have a tropical system developing in the Gulf, we actually have a lot of moisture around. No real areas of low pressure to speak of, but we do have just precipitation making its way onshore to the Gulf Coast of the United States there. Your jet stream right now is basically a miniature trough around where that storm system is, which is very common. A ridge just to the east of it, which is also common. And then quite a bit of a trough in the east here. It's a little bit of a mild one, but it is a little cooler today than we have seen in past days. This is all very common when you have the storm moving onshore here, bringing cooler air, warmer air excelling to the east of there, and then because that warmth is mostly centered over the west, we have this little bit of a dip here in the east. So this is textbook stuff here. As we keep going towards Saturday, on October 5th now, we see a 989 millibar low pressure center there for central Canada. This is going to bring about one of these stronger cold fronts, and we already see it developing with some lighter showers. This will get heavier overnight Saturday into Sunday, and even Sunday into Monday. We do see some charged up cold air moving in behind it, so this is definitely going to be an impactful one. Some warm air surging to the east of it, which as we just mentioned a minute ago is very common, but we already see the warm air kind of pulling back up the west coast, so this is going to create a pattern kind of like this over time that eventually moves eastward. Again, Gulf moisture is around, not really prevailing yet into anything. As we move towards Sunday on October 6th, we see this very strong cold front has moved through the Great Lakes and is now over eastern Canada and areas of Michigan and Ohio as well. Very, very windy likely along this. Also, again, heavier showers and even some thunderstorms wouldn't be too surprising. So could be an impactful cold front, as we've mentioned a few times already. Gulf of Mexico still looking charged up, and once we see this system move through here, we will see it develop easily because there's so much moisture to work with, so much warm water to work with, and overall, this system, just as our previous system had, it really has limitless possibilities because of the environment it will be moving into. A Gulf of Mexico area that already is favorable every single year this time of year is above normal as far as how ripe the conditions are for development. Let's just take this towards Monday. This is going to be October 7th. We see overnight, Sunday into Monday here, this cold front is reaching the East Coast, bringing still some thunderstorms and showers along it here for these areas. And by the time we reach Monday afternoon, on the 7th, we reach past the east. Unless you're in New England, this thing is still moving through a very large ridge out west, and then this trough that is now sitting over the east with that cold front having just passed. We do see our low coming from the Pacific, moving into the southern Gulf of Mexico, just to the kind of northwest of the Yucatan Peninsula here of Mexico. This is typically a little bit of a less favorable area than the northern Gulf is, in my opinion. But this one is moving northward. Typically, that gives it a much better chance of development than if they're kind of curving southward here. When they curve southward, they just get a little bit suppressed. A lot of these areas feature very tall mountains, and that is a lot to do with it, really. Once we move towards Tuesday, we see this thing is really gaining steam fast. The 999 just to the north of the Yucatan Peninsula. Unfortunately, we do have a weaker low off the east coast of Florida, which I will also be watching. I've seen both the European model and GFS model show this, and there's really nothing stopping this from developing. The current steering pattern would take it directly offshore likely. But if we see anything change up with that steering pattern, it could easily go up the east coast as well, if this storm even really develops. We have a massive ridge still over the west and a large trough over the east. But again, this trough brings the jet stream almost flat off the east coast. This is the type of pattern that if we were in the wintertime, you would see really cold conditions in these areas, but snowstorms would be moving directly offshore and bringing these areas some lighter snowfall events as opposed to coming up the east coast and bringing these colder areas snow. Just to give you a reference, not really applicable, but can you tell I'm excited for winter? I think you probably can, obviously. By Wednesday afternoon here, we're seeing a 993. Still not the most overwhelmingly intense storm, but this is exactly what we saw the models do with Helene. They weren't showing a very strong storm at first, and they really were struggling to see that development. And then obviously we know what happened. That storm was a very major hurricane, category 4 or 5. At its peak, I don't know if that'll ever get really solved, whether we really hit category 5 or not. Maybe it will, but regardless, we didn't see the models outputting anything close to that until we were very close to the system. So definitely keep the options open in your mind that this could be a stronger storm than what the models are showing it. It could also be a weaker storm. It could be a storm that never develops as well. So there's two sides to the coin, of course, but definitely we want to keep in mind that this could be more impactful than what the models are showing. This isn't the end-all, be-all, I guess is what I'm getting at. And we see this storm, just as I mentioned, the steering pattern takes it directly offshore, which is good news for the East Coast for now. Still a pretty major trough in the east with a major ridge in the west by Wednesday the 9th. Thursday, we finally see that all lifting off, and this storm's a 992 just to the south of the Tampa Bay, somewhere between Fort Myers and Tampa, I would say, is where this particular model shows it hitting. Keep in mind, again, the European model has struggled with tropical systems this year so far. We do have GFS support this time around, and they're basically showing the same thing, which is going to bode well in accuracy at least. But I think the lack of development between the Yucatan Peninsula and then Central Florida here is a little bit of a question mark. And, these deterministic models is what we call them, the lower resolution models. They do sometimes show a lot less intensity than what we end up getting. It's all something to think about, but again, sometimes they show things that never even happen, and that's something that we also have to consider as well. By Friday, you see it it reaches towards this east coast of Florida and then really slowly meanders down the coast. This would be a terrible scenario for this southeast or southwest coast, better yet, of Florida. If a storm stalls out like that, you get more and more and more rainfall and longer impacts, which is just terrible news. The one thing Helene had going for it was that it was a quick moving hurricane, and we saw how much damage that thing did. Even at the click it was moving at, if that storm was any slower, those impacts would have been multiplied, unfortunately. Well, I guess fortunately, because that's not what happened, but that would have been absolutely terrible. As we move towards Saturday, we see this system just moves back into the Gulf, kind of weak. We have a general zonal flow in the United States, which is basically where this jet stream is relatively flat. It is descending towards the east. So a little cooler, I would say, in the east than it is in the west, but hardly. It looks pretty mild, pretty temperate for most of these areas. We do see still some lower pressure lingering over the central Gulf. This storm really did a loop. It just heads down the central Gulf of Florida, or the central coast of Florida, the west coast of central Florida, and then does a loop like this, and it wants to sit back over the central Atlantic or central Gulf of Mexico, better yet. But thankfully, it really doesn't develop much anymore on this model. We could definitely see it be different, but I doubt that loop is going to happen that way. Anything's possible, but I doubt it. We see this cold front also on this GFS model. We also see this system move from the Pacific to the north of the Yucatan Peninsula. It stays weaker on this model, a lot weaker. And really, we don't get this, low here and low to the east of Florida. We get kind of a combined in the middle low, and it's much weaker. It hits the coast of Florida. It's kind of just a tropical area of interest, and it never really develops. Yeah, we really don't see anything get going here on this model at any point. After that point, we actually get this zonal flow, just like the European model showed, but we quickly get another very strong cold front here. By the time we're reaching about the Monday, Tuesday time frame, is the 14th, 15th. And then another very, very strong cold front. Look at this, some snow for the Appalachian Mountain Range, perhaps. In October would be absolutely insane. Take that with a grain of salt, as that is extremely rare. But we start to get this very, very cold pattern in the east on this model. And that's basically what we've been alluding to being possible. I think that that's a little far-fetched with the snow. Likely, when we look at the temperatures, we will see severely below average temperatures on this particular model. The total precipitation, I would say the only areas that could be above average is the Pacific Northwest a little bit there, a little bit of New England, and then likely Florida and some of the Gulf Coast. But let's take a look at it here, the precipitation anomalies, and we really don't even get the Pacific Northwest. We get a little bit of New England, maybe in the neutral to slightly above average precipitation there. And then we get the Gulf Coast with a little bit for Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and then Florida gets bombed with just, inches and inches above average there of precipitation due to this strong stalling tropical system. Again, when they stall like that, they bring more and more and more rainfall, and that's what we see in this particular instance. As we take a look at the total snowfall, we see that the Cascades here get a couple of inches perhaps for Washington State. The Rockies get a dusting to maybe an inch. So still very slow in the snow department. As we take a look at the temperature anomalies here, let's take a look. This is Friday, Saturday here. Sunday, we see this cold front moving in. Monday, Tuesday, look at this. We really get the East Coast getting the brunt of this. We do see some of the deeper south as well. But mostly this is not going to be the eastern half of the nation. It looks like much more of the eastern third there, as you can see, with the furthest below average for the mid-Atlantic and northeast here. By the time we're approaching the 10th, so about a week from now. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, look at that cold air just sticking around for the east. Then we get a warm-up with an immediate rebound back into a cold front again, like we mentioned. Monday, Tuesday here, Wednesday, Thursday, here's the second, or this is the third Arctic blast, better yet. Well, I wouldn't call the other ones an Arctic blast. Maybe that second one. This third one, we really just see it blast from Canada. Look at this, just shooting down with this far below average temperatures. The greens are 10 to 15 degrees below normal. These kind of magentas in here, where we do get some flakes flying on this particular model, we do see 15 to 25 degrees below normal. So it makes sense that we're seeing this far below average temperatures to support something like that. Again, a little bit far-fetched, very, very rare for the October timeframe, but nothing is impossible, so we'll count it as a possibility. And it looks like more cooldowns are on the way. Look at this one descending in right as this is ending, so as we're approaching the 20th, and maybe another down the pipeline, it looks like, behind that one even. So it looks like this barrage of cooldowns is not going to end on this model. This one really just wants to show continuous cold. Starting during the 10th, we get kind of a back and forth, and then after like the 12th, 13th, we are all cold almost in the east, it looks like. So yes, some signs are pointing towards cold in the east. As we take a look at our CFS long-range model, this is the 4th through the 9th, really neutral in the east, but as we move towards the 9th through the 14th, look at this. Very cool compared to normal here for a lot of the east. Let's take a look at the 14th through the 19th, a little bit cool as well. Then the 19th through the 24th, getting some more cold air. 24th through the 29th, a little bit cooler. But then the 29th through the 3rd of November, getting very, very cool once more. 3rd of November to the 8th, a little bit more neutral. And then the 8th through the 13th, getting cooler again. So we're going back and forth on this particular long-range model, but it does support pretty frequent cold air, which is going to be in line with what we just saw from our other models. So it's always good to see the agreement on these models. It's going to, again, like we mentioned with the hurricane stuff, bode well for accuracy. Here's the 7-day graphical tropical weather outlook. We do have major hurricane Kirk underwent extreme rapid development from like a category 1 way past category 3 within a few hours. We saw a violent kind of timing of intensity there, and really just a quick intensification unlike anything I've really ever witnessed. So that is a very major hurricane out there, Hurricane Kirk. We do have Tropical Storm Leslie now out there. Currently has 50-mile-per-hour sustained winds. We'll look at the cone forecast in a minute. And now we still sit at a 0% chance of development in the Gulf over the next 48 hours, but a 40% chance over the next 7 days. Definitely an interesting scenario, and I'm trying to figure out. Let's see. Yeah, I think they're kind of picking up on the one that crosses over Mexico here. They don't really mention the Pacific in there that I can tell. But it seems like with just the verbiage of, moving through kind of towards the east, towards Florida, is along the lines of what we've seen the model showing this Pacific one do. So kind of makes sense to me that that's what they'd be talking about. Here's Hurricane Kirk, again, remaining at major hurricane status through the weekend. Maybe getting back down to category 2 or below by Sunday, and then moving towards Europe, still at post hurricane status. So it's hurricane winds, but not really a tropical system anymore by 2 p.m. on Tuesday. So very interesting, could be impactful to Europe. We'll have to wait and see. Here is Leslie, which is expected to become a hurricane by 2 p.m. tomorrow on Friday, and a major hurricane by 2 p.m. on Tuesday. All of a sudden, we're seeing all these storms becoming so major in the Atlantic, and this is what we talked about all season long. And look, guys, I'll be the first to tell you, this hurricane season did not meet my expectations for myself. So let alone, you guys seeing all the forecasts from me, the National Hurricane Center, a lot of the weather universities around the nation all calling for a monster hurricane season. I think it underwhelmed everybody as far as the amount of storms. Obviously, every storm that we've seen has been very interesting, with the exception of maybe a handful. But we have seen a just unbelievable development on so many of these storms, especially Helene, as you guys know. We see now Leslie, we saw Kirk. So we're seeing these very strong storms. And then the one in June, I forget what the name was, but one of a very historic storm for that early on in the season. We've seen just extreme storms, but still, as far as named storms and, overall intensity of the hurricane season, they do have a metric for that. I don't have it, available right now, but they do actually have a metric for the overall intensity of the hurricane season. We're still below average, believe it or not, on the season. So it's close. And, a lot of people were forecasting for it to be well above average. It's still struggling to get to average. So I think after these next couple of storms, like when this one develops into a major hurricane, likely, once Kirk has been a major hurricane for a while, and we'll have to see what happens with the Gulf system, we might be reaching average as far as the overall intensity in the Atlantic, which is crazy. But I think the intensity that these storms are picking up when they do develop is very telling of the conditions that are there, and is the reason why everybody thought this was going to be a terrible hurricane season. Every storm we've seen has just underwent extreme intensification, as I've mentioned. So that is kind of my spiel on the hurricane season so far. Obviously a very impactful one regardless. Here is the kind of spaghetti model plot for this storm moving over Mexico into the Gulf over the next 24 hours, then moving eastward, likely somewhere in this direction. As you can tell, we do have a couple of models. One of these, the TCLP, always shows like a straight line, so that one you just want to kind of disregard because that's obviously not going to happen. We do have one that is curving back toward Mexico, and that is a very real model, but the rest do show this system heading directly kind of to the northeast towards Florida. So we're going to be watching that very, very closely. And here's the intensity chart. Keep in mind, there is a few that keep us just down here. We don't see anything happen, but there's a rather large group here, as you can see, that do take us to either a very intense tropical storm or even category 1. We even have one showing category 2 and one showing category 4 there. So this is again another case where really the sky is the limit here. We have limitless possibilities, and that's typically how the Gulf goes. So we're going to be tracking it. A little bit of a surprise storm, unfortunately. So be sure to subscribe. We do upload every single day. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it. Leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.